I smoothed the wrinkles from my navy sheath dress, feeling deliberately understated amid the velvet drapes and marble floors of Violetta, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Chicago, not because I couldn't afford luxury, my portfolio could buy half the block, but because my family had intentionally chosen this place to unsettle me. A Hollis? My older brother Grant's voice rang out, laced with mock surprise. I didn't think you'd actually show up. This place isn't exactly economical. I caught my reflection in a wall mirror. No designer logos, no diamonds. Just the dress and a pair of sapphire studs my late aunt once gave me. A look I'd refined over the last decade. I'll manage, I replied quietly, watching Grant share a smug glance with his wife, Celeste. As the maitre d' guided us to our table, I overheard Celeste mutter to my mother, "I told you we should have picked something more budget-friendly for her. If only they knew I owned a controlling stake in the hospitality group that bought Violetta last spring." The annual Hollis family dinner had become a masquerade of status ever since I left Hollis Equity 12 years ago at 26, walking away from what my father called the only sensible future to chase a laughable idea. Something with drones, he scoffed. Grant, ever the favorite, had stayed. Now CFO of Hollis Equity, he and Celeste had a Gold Coast penthouse and a country club lifestyle. They loved reminding me I'd once asked for help fixing my car. "So, Mira," Grant drawled as we sat down, "still tinkering with that drone hobby?" I sipped my wine, remembering the urgent proposal Hollis Equity had sent that morning, begging Artemis Airtech for a logistics contract. "Something like that," I replied. They didn't know Artemis, my company, was already operating a $1,800,000,000 zero-cents drone fleet across 6 continents, or that I'd funneled the original seed money from a silent exit deal with Tesla 5 years ago. Only my aunt had known. "Let them talk," she once said. "Just make sure you're the one signing the checks later." "She still drives that rust bucket Honda," Celeste snickered. If only she knew I'd landed my Gulfstream 2 hours ago. Speaking of cars, Grant chimed in, adjusting his Cartier cufflinks. "Celeste and I just ordered the new Bentley Flying Spur, fully custom, hand-stitched leather, imported trim." He turned to me with a smug tilt of his head. "What's it like, Mira, taking the train to work?" "Great way to cut emissions," I replied smoothly, thinking of the LEED-certified private jet terminal Artemis had just finished building near O'Hare. My father cleared his throat. "Now, Grant, let's not tease. Not everyone is made for the pressures of real finance. At least she's independent." He said the word like it was a diagnosis. "Oh," Celeste chimed in brightly. "Grant has some exciting news. Tell them, babe." Grant's chest puffed. "We're in talks with Argonne Freight. Once the deal closes, Hollis Equity will manage their entire Midwest logistics portfolio. Billion-dollar territory." I smiled faintly. Argonne Freight was one of the logistics companies Artemis quietly acquired 6 months ago. They had no idea their supposed deal would place them neatly under my corporate umbrella. "That's huge," I said, reaching for the breadbasket. "When's the pitch?" "Tomorrow morning," Grant said proudly. "Their CEO's flying in by private jet. You know you're dealing with serious people when they don't do commercial." If he only knew, it was my jet, and I'd be watching their entire meeting live from Artemis HQ. "I've heard the CEO's a mystery," my father added. "Nobody knows their name." "That's what high-level business looks like," Grant said with a smug smile. "It's about power, influence, serious capital." Celeste waved down the waiter. "Speaking of capital, Mira, they've got a nice salad that's reasonable." "I'll take the chef's tasting menu," I said, scanning the wine pairings. A pause. The tasting menu was $560, 0 cents per guest. "Mira," my mother whispered, eyes darting. "That's steep. You sure?" "Don't worry," I said, folding my napkin. "I've been saving." Celeste bristled. "This isn't the time to perform, Mira. It's a little sad." "I'm not performing," I said, locking eyes with her. Grant scoffed. "What next? You're secretly a jet owner too?" Right then, his phone buzzed. Grant glanced at his phone, the color draining from his face. "Excuse me," he muttered, rising stiffly and walking toward the lobby. I could still hear him from my seat. What do you mean the Argon Freight CEO canceled the meetings in 12 hours? This is a billion-dollar deal. You can't just... His voice dropped as he disappeared from view. When he returned, the cocky grin was gone. Celeste leaned in. Is everything all right? Fine, he snapped. Just business. Nothing you'd understand, Mira. I took a sip of wine, already drafting the email in my mind, the one I'd send tonight, as CEO of Argon Freight, respectfully declining Hollis Equity's proposal. We'd be going with another partner. You know, Celeste said quickly, changing the subject, this restaurant's part of the Violetta Group now. Grant and I just bought some shares. Didn't we, sweetheart? Grant recovered enough composure to smirk. Almost 5%. Pretty exciting. How nice for you, I said warmly, remembering the board vote where I approved their micro-share purchase via a shell company wholly owned by Artemis. Just then, the waiter returned with my wine, a 2003 Burgundy rare enough to have its own security detail. Compliments of the owner, he said with a slight bow. Celeste blinked. There must be some mistake. We're shareholders. We didn't authorize anything. No mistake, madame, the waiter replied. The owner was clear. For Miss Hollis's table only. Every eye turned to me. I raised my glass, cool and unbothered. How generous, I said. Grant's phone buzzed again, likely another panic call from his team. He excused himself again. Celeste stared at the wine, then at me. I don't get it, she whispered to my father. They probably think she's someone else, he said firmly, as if trying to convince himself. I simply smiled. Tomorrow would speak for itself. The next morning, I sat in my private office, top floor of the Artemion Tower, watching the security feed as Grant paced the glass conference room. He'd arrived early, desperate to lock the Argon deal. Then Julia's voice came through my intercom. Mrs. Hollis, your father and brother just arrived. They're here with Mr. Campbell. Of course they were. If you're curious what happened when they found out who was really behind the deal, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything changes. Celeste never missed a chance to bask in Grant's supposed brilliance, and my father no doubt came to reinforce the illusion that his beloved son-in-law was the true financial prodigy of the family. Perfect, I said. Let's proceed. If you to lift your suitcases, I opened my laptop, fingers gliding over the keyboard as I scheduled the email to send in precisely 10 minutes. Subject, East Coast Operations Proposal. Dear Mr. Campbell, after careful consideration, Argon Freight has decided to explore other strategic partnerships for our regional expansion. While we appreciate Hollis Equity's interest, we believe our long-term goals are better aligned elsewhere. Best regards, Mira Hollis, CEO, Argon Freight. 10 years of being overlooked, mocked, underestimated. While they laughed, I built, acquired, dominated. That chapter ended today. On my security feed, more figures entered the glass-walled conference room. Celeste was straightening Grant's tie like a campaign manager before a debate. My father sat at the head of the table, oozing smugness. Then Julia's voice returned. The Argon team has arrived. Shall I send them in? Please. On screen, 3 of my top execs entered. Grant sprang to his feet. Welcome! We've been so eager to... Wait, where's your CEO? David Chen, my COO, gave a professional smile. Miss Hollis sends her regards. She's decided to handle the matter differently. Mira Hollis? Celeste said, her voice laced with confusion. Right on cue, Grant's phone vibrated. I watched him read the email, watched his expression collapse. This can't be real, he stammered. They're rejecting us? Perhaps, David said evenly. You should ask Mira. Silence. Celeste gave a strained laugh. Mira? What's she got to do with any of this? She can barely afford her dinner order. David tapped his tablet, projecting a summary onto the conference screen. Mira Hollis, founder and CEO of Artemis Holdings, owner of Argon Freight, Violetta Group, and 60-plus subsidiaries. Estimated net worth $8.2 billion, 0 cents. I stepped through the door. The silence cracked like glass. Celeste looked like her face had been drained of color. Grant sank into his seat. My father was motionless. "Good morning," I said, smiling. "I believe we need to have a serious conversation about your conduct, Grant," I said calmly. Celeste's voice cracked. This is impossible. You drive a Honda. You borrowed money for a repair." "Actually," I corrected her, "I own the dealership that services that car. The loan story? Just amusing." Grant's voice finally returned. "But Argonne Freight? The jet? The building?" "Yes," I said, lips curling into a smile. "The private jet you couldn't stop bragging about? It's part of my personal fleet. Would you like a tour? It's at my terminal. Artemis Aviation built it last year." That finally broke my father's silence. "So, all this time, you've been building an empire." I met his stunned gaze. "While you were busy mocking my little drone hobby, I was becoming one of the largest private investors in the U.S. I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, letting the skyline speak for me. "That restaurant you just bought shares in? I own 40% of the group. That office tower Hollis Equity leases space from? I bought it last spring. That private jet firm you desperately need? Just one arm of my aerospace division." Celeste had started to cry. Her mascara streaked in black lines down her face. "Why didn't you tell us?" I turned back. "Would you have believed me? You all decided I was the family embarrassment. It was easier to let you think that while I built something you couldn't even imagine." "Now listen here," my father snapped, clinging to whatever authority he had left. "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to play family now, not after a decade of watching them humiliate me at every turn." I picked up a folder from the table. "Let's talk about Hollis Equity." Grant stiffened. "My team discovered some creative accounting in your recent filings. Care to explain?" Grant's face strained. Celeste turned sharply toward him. "What accounting?" "Ooh, the usual inflated margins, off-book transfers, and about $3,400,000 0 cents quietly redirected to a Cayman account." "You've been investigating us?" my father asked, voice rising. "Of course. I vet every potential partner," I said coolly. David stepped forward and handed each of them a copy of the report. "You'll find all the details inside, including that Cayman transaction, Grant." Celeste snatched her copy, hands trembling. "Grant, what is she talking about?" Celeste's voice cracked in disbelief. But Grant didn't answer. He stared blankly at the report, shoulders slumped. He knew every word was true. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, stepping forward. "Grant will resign from Hollis Equity, effective immediately. If he does so quietly, this report stays confidential." "And if he doesn't?" Celeste asked, her voice shaking. I gave a small shrug. "Well, the SEC tends to find this sort of documentation fascinating." "You can't do this," my father said weakly. "Actually, I can." I pressed a button on the conference phone. "Julia, please initiate Operation Clean Sweep." "In a way, Miss Hollis." "Operation what?" Celeste whispered. "Effective this moment," I said, turning to face the room. "Artemis Holdings is announcing its acquisition of a majority stake in Hollis Equity. A full audit and executive restructuring will begin immediately, starting with leadership." My father fell back into his chair. "You're taking over Hollis Equity? But that's our family firm, our legacy." "No," I replied evenly. "It was your opportunity to create a legacy. But you were too busy playing favorites and protecting corruption to notice what was crumbling beneath your feet." I paused at the door. "Oh, and Celeste, about last night's wine? That vintage came from my private cellar. It cost more than your new Bentley." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Grant resigned just as expected. Celeste filed for divorce the moment she saw the full extent of his misconduct. My father announced early retirement, too ashamed to report to his familiar daughter. I brought in elite forensic accountants, restructured Hollis Equity under the Artemis umbrella, and implemented airtight compliance protocols. When the market realized I was behind the takeover, the stock soared. 3 months later, my mother asked to meet. She picked a small corner cafe, No five-star facades this time. After an awkward pause, she finally spoke. I don't understand. Why live like you were struggling when, in reality, a billionaire? I finished, stirring my espresso, because I needed to know who you all really were when you thought I was nothing. She lowered her eyes. We were awful to you. Yes, I said calmly, you were. Can you ever forgive us? I looked at her, unflinching. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Mom, I said quietly. It's trust. You all showed me exactly who you were when you thought I had nothing. I met her eyes. So why should I trust you now that you know I have everything? She didn't have an answer. 1 year later, I sat aboard my private jet, yes, the same one Grant had admired without knowing who owned it, returning from a summit in London. The Artemis portfolio had just expanded into Europe. Another milestone. Celeste had remarried, now living in a modest apartment in Lincoln Park with a CPA who worked long hours. Grant was selling luxury SUVs in New Jersey. My father had quietly purchased a small condo in Sarasota. The empire he hoped to pass down had dissolved. My phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. Happy birthday, Mira. I know I don't deserve it, but I miss you. I looked out the window, watching clouds drift past. I thought about family, about power, about what success really costs and what it's worth. Maybe one day, we'd rebuild something real, something earned. But not today. Today, I was at peace knowing I'd created something extraordinary while they were busy laughing behind my back. My grandmother would have smiled. Mrs. Hollis? The flight attendant said, approaching with a gentle smile. We're preparing to land at your private terminal. I nodded. Thank you. Oh, and can you make sure my Honda's pulled up front? I think I'll drive myself today. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't wealth. It's the quiet clarity of knowing you never had to prove anything. Sometimes the one they mocked for taking the train ends up owning the rails, the station, and the trains themselves. That evening, I unlocked the safe in my office. I slipped in a new item, Grant's resignation letter. I joined a few keepsakes, the receipt from Violetta, and a worn envelope containing my grandmother's handwritten note. Let them underestimate you, my dear. Success is sweetest when it blindsides them. And oh, how right she was. I spent 10 years being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, even by the people who were supposed to believe in me most. And yet, I didn't let that define me. I used every doubt, every insult as fuel. If you felt even a flicker of connection with my story, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the failure at the family table, the one no one saw coming, then I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below, tell me your story, tell me where you're headed. Let's lift each other up, because we're not alone. We're building something bigger than revenge. We're building power, dignity, and purpose. And if you believe in rising quietly, working relentlessly, and showing up when it matters most, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps bring these stories to light. Let's create a community where no one has to apologize for their ambition and where quiet strength is finally recognized for what it is, unstoppable. Remember this, the world may not clap for you when you start, but they'll watch in stunned silence when you succeed. And sometimes, that's the sweetest sound of all.